Good morning and welcome to this, our eighth webinar in the Quality Infrastructure in Energy series. I am Latoya Burnham, Technical Officer for Quality Promotions at the CrossQ Secretariat based in Barbados. I am hoping that those of you who joined us today are able to take something away with you. What we aim to do in this session is to examine the issues of energy sustainability, climate change, and how adding quality infrastructure components can vastly improve our journey to getting where we need to be as a region. The main thing we wish you to take away from here today is that as an organization, CrossQ is very serious about our work in introducing quality parameters into the energy sector to ensure that we all benefit and we are better off for the collaborations that are being created through this drive to help our region reduce its energy costs, mainly from fossil fuels. This webinar series is coming to you through our partnership with the CARICOM Energy Unit and the Technical Assistance for Sustainable Energy in the Caribbean, or TAPSEC project, which is funded by the European Union, the GIZ, and German Corporation. TAPSEC has been working with CrossQ to accomplish a number of things: awareness of energy sustainability in CARICOM and the role of introducing quality. That's one of them. To kick off things this morning is our CEO of CrossQ, Mr. Derek Omar, who will bring greetings on behalf of CrossQ and the project partners. We have an interesting panel lined up for you today, ranging from experts in energy sustainability to experts in QI and experts in climate change. But first, to bring welcome, Mr. Derek Omar.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Latoya. Mr. Jose Trejo, Director of the CrossQ Council and Director of the Belize Bureau of Standards. Dr. Danielle Kane, Project Development Specialist, Caribbean Community Center for Climate Change. Mr. Gerald Lindo, Sustainable Energy Expert, Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCRE. Ms. Latoya Burnham, Technical Officer for Quality Promotions and CrossQ. Representatives of GIZ and the TAPSEC project, representatives of the CARICOM Energy Unit, representatives of the private sector organizations and businesses who were able to make it with us here today, technical officers and staff of the various bureaus of standards and CrossQ Secretariat, media representatives, ladies and gentlemen. The CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality welcomes you here today, and we thank you for joining us in yet another webinar in our Quality Infrastructure in Energy series. This webinar is entitled Energy Sustainability for Climate Change. What are the implications for our region? Climate change is a popular and frequent term that is used all over the world. I'm sure that most of us here, if not all, have an idea of what climate change is. And that is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere brought about from the consumption of fossil fuels, for example, coal, oil, and gas, amongst others. And that countries are called to urgent action to address the effect of these climate change. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change defines the phenomena as a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and that is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. So what else do we know? We know that the rate of global warming caused by climate change is unsustainable, and that the effects can be seen in new adverse weather patterns, such as severe flooding, droughts, increased intensity of hurricanes, warming of the oceans, and increased sea levels, all of which threaten our very existence as small island developing states. These events have necessitated commitment to international agreements, such as the Paris Agreement by the global community, and which includes each of our CARICOM member states, to keep global temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. Each country which has signed on to the Paris Agreement has committed through national determined contributions to introduce and execute strategies and actions aimed at reducing carbon emissions. For many countries, including our countries in the region, this includes the reduction of energy usage through and the introduction of energy efficiency measures, such as measures and policies on transportation, electrical and mechanical equipment, appliances and buildings, and the uptake of clean energy sources, as there is a clear and undeniable link between climate change and the carbon emissions due to the usage of fossil fuels for energy use. Today, we want to go further and to show you how CrossQ, a quality infrastructure development institution within CARICOM, can and is assisting in the fight against climate change and in the uptake of sustainable energy. CrossQ is a network of the national standard bureaus in CARICOM, of which there are 15. The organization has the responsibility to develop and harmonize all aspects of a functioning quality infrastructure, which includes standards, metrology as the science of measurement, conformity assessment systems such as inspection, testing, and certification, and accreditation of all these aspects to international standards. This will occur across CARICOM to facilitate trade, ensure consumer safety, and protect the environment. CrossQ, as an institution within the Caribbean community, was established under Article 67 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and by extension, we have a role in energy and climate change, which began with a mandate given to us by the 41st special meeting of the CARICOM Trade and Energy Development Ministers meeting held in Trinidad and Tobago around 2013, and out of which one of the tasks was to develop an energy efficiency standard for appliances and buildings, which we were able to do. Plus, we are now developing energy efficiency labeling standards for electrical appliances to complement that code and to use in office buildings as well as domestic facilities, such as air conditions, lighting, and refrigerators. So we will not be highlighting all this work and its connection to climate change through reduction in energy consumption at this meeting, but we will exemplify some of it. And we will go further and also focus on other sustainable energy initiatives, which are ongoing at the national level in the region, and how quality infrastructure can be integrated to guarantee better safety and performance in those initiatives. We'd also like to highlight our other regional institutions and what they are doing, such as the 5Cs and CCRE and the CARICOM Energy Unit. And in this regard, and from this perspective, we are joined today by the CARICOM Community Center for Climate Change, the 5Cs, and the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, CCRE. And this is not to mention all the donors who are assisting all of us to further our work in this area, such as GIZ and the European Union in particular at this point in time. Fighting climate change is all our responsibility. We must join forces and explore the synergies as individuals and organizations, each using our unique strength and united in the effort to mitigate against the adverse effects of this phenomenon. Our very survival as small island developing states depend upon this. And we thank you therefore very much for attending this seminar series to help us all come together to battle this issue of climate change and sustainable energy. Thanks very much, and please have a wonderful webinar.
Thank you as well, CEO. Now, as I mentioned before, we have a very, very good panel lined up for you today. So get your questions ready. We'll be taking your questions during the session. I'm going to ask Daika to please share the screen in terms of the housekeeping matters for today. So this webinar, you should know, is being recorded and streamed live on CrossQ's YouTube page. We're asking you to use the Q&A button that you see at the bottom of your screen for your questions, but we also encourage you to use the chat function if you want to dialogue amongst yourselves. But as long as you have a question for the panel today, we're asking you to please put your questions in the Q&A session. We encourage your engagement, we encourage your questions, and we are very excited to see so many of you here. So let's get started. Our first presenter is Mr. Gerald Lindo of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, which is known by the acronym CCRE. As CCRE's sustainable energy expert, Mr. Lindo has over 12 years of research and professional experience in clean energy and climate change. He believes that climate change is the most pressing challenge of our time and that the transition to cleaner energy is the most compelling opportunity. Before joining CCRE's team, Mr. Lindo served the government of Jamaica, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the United Nations in various technical roles. He has worked on energy policy, energy modeling, greenhouse gas mitigation, environmental and climate risk management, as well as project management, investment mobilization, and international cooperation and negotiation. Mr. Lindo is a graduate of the Williams College and the University of Georgia, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Science degrees. He is also a certified energy manager with the Association of Energy Engineers. He wants the CCRE to contribute to the Caribbean's prosperity by enhancing regional cooperation, accelerating investments in people and infrastructure, and offering world-class services in the spirit of continuous learning and improvement. Mr. Lindo will set the stage for discussion by examining regional developments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. The stage is yours, Mr. Lindo.
Thank you, Latoya. While you were talking here, I was dealing with a number of overlapping crises on my computer. I should have sent this to you beforehand, so I'm going to revert to an older version of this presentation, but I will still, I think, give people a lot to chew on for the next 15 minutes. I want to use this presentation to really outline some of the critical issues with respect to renewable energy and energy efficiency in the region. I will speak a bit about the historic and current energy status, and I'll speak about then the trends going forwards. A lot of this would not be new to anyone who has been following the Caribbean's energy situation for a long time. One of the primary issues that we have is a relatively high energy cost in the region. It has held back competitiveness and growth for a very long time. There are a number of drivers of this. First of all, there are a number of sector inefficiencies. We tend, through our technology choices, to use rather, well, forms of energy that we shouldn't. In most countries, with the exception being maybe Trinidad and Belize, and we'll get to those in a second, or there are exceptions that prove the rule. In most countries, the primary technology used for electricity generation is small, relatively small, liquid-fueled generators running off of either heavy fuel oil or diesel. This leads to a petroleum dependence that is consequential. It means that anytime we have a variation in world oil prices, or energy prices on the local market, electricity prices, they move around in unpredictable and usually unfavorable ways. Because we're small islands and we're talking about small generators, we have considerable unfavorable economies of scale, or diseconomies of scale, if you like. Because we have small and isolated systems, interconnection is either impossible or very expensive to do. And so all of us find ourselves trying to work by ourselves as small islands to try and overcome some of these issues that we're talking about. Back to sector inefficiencies. Because of the choice of technology, we're talking about rather low efficiency in the main in terms of conversion of our oil products into electricity. We're also talking about, because of our social situations, typically rather large levels of of non-technical losses on the system. That is to say, there tends to be a lot of illegal abstraction of electricity. It is especially bad in Haiti, in Jamaica, and in Guyana. And again, this is driven by a lot of our social situations. We are a number of highly indebted countries in the main, and historically, our economic growth over the last, let's say, 4 decades has been rather anemic, and therefore people have a problem with affordability of power. Because we're using these expensive technologies, that makes it worse, because small liquid fuel generators tend to be rather expensive. We are talking about generation rates in the 20s or the 30s or 40s in terms of US cents per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, if you look to the north in America, we're talking about an average rate of 12, which renders us very uncompetitive and makes it hard for us to grow. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. Trinidad is a very notable exception. They have gas, they use a tremendous amount of gas in their generation, and their costs to the consumer somewhere around 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And you can see what that has done for Trinidad in terms of their industrial base, in terms of the type of activities they can do as an economy, and in terms of their overall prosperity. So I'd argue that they are an exception that proves the rule that if you have small liquid fuel generators, you're not in the best of situation. Belize is another interesting example. They have, I think, the highest rate of renewable energy penetration in the Caribbean, driven mostly by hydro. They also have an interconnection with Mexico that allows them to tap into that market. Now, this is something that makes them somewhat atypical. They have higher rates of renewable electricity interconnect, and therefore leverage a larger electricity market to again reduce their prices. And their prices, I believe, are somewhere around 13 cents per US dollars per kilowatt hour. Puts them in a very good situation. And these exceptions prove the rule. Now, despite these high costs and despite the amount of illegal extraction we actually have very high rates of electrification in the region, approaching 90% and above in most of these countries. So we are consuming in a way that would suggest that we are highly developed, even though in terms of our economic situation, in terms of the source of generation technology we're using, we're not where we need to be. This leads into a number of overlapping crises that I'd want to mention. We want to talk about climate today. My colleague Daniel will get more into that, but just to note unambiguously, the climate crisis is real, and the solution to it, can't go around it, it's a matter of physics, is that the world needs to transition away from fossil fuel generation and towards renewable energy. We have to stop emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Can't go around it, it's a matter of physics. And while we do look to the countries that are the larger historical emitters to lead the way in that, it is also true for us. We don't want to be the last people driving horse and buggy in the age of the car, so to speak. So as the world transitions to renewable energy, it makes sense for us as well. And we have to do it. We have this imperative. The imperative is there because of the climate crisis, but also for economic reasons. There's been tremendous technological progress in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency over the last decades. And in many places, renewable energy is becoming cheaper than installing traditional options, such as coal or natural gas or oil-fired generation. It's already much cheaper than oil-fired generation in most places. The economics of it goes a little bit deeper than that, though, because we have a way when we're thinking of economics to only think about price. We're only talking about the cost of electricity. But there are costs that we sometimes don't think about. One that rises to my mind quite a bit is health, both environmental and human. If you live next to a plant that is burning oil every day to generate electricity, you're breathing that in. If you are driving on a street where instead of a lot of electric vehicles, you have lots of diesel and gasoline vehicles belching out pollutants, you're breathing that in. We pay the cost in terms of our health outcomes and in terms of our health spending, even though we usually don't count it when we're thinking about the cost of energy. Similarly, we can think of externalities associated with the climate as things that we don't normally think about, and all of these aspects do overlap in a few ways. The climate crisis requires us to make a shift in our energy forms, but because of our economic crisis, it is difficult for us to find the capital to do so. And because of this exposure to international commodity prices and all the trouble that that brings, and because of the expense of the energy forms that we do use, it makes our economic crisis worse. So the climate, economic, and energy crisis all interlink in consequential ways. Because of this, the strategic value of RE and energy efficiency has been almost universally recognized in CARICOM. Every country has some very ambitious targets in terms of what they want to do with renewable energy, because they see that this is the future. Renewable energy is cheaper, it's cleaner, it's better for you, it's necessary for the planet. And as we roll out more and more renewable energy in terms of not just plants connected to the grid, but also rooftop solar, in terms of e-mobility, all of these create economic opportunities for installers, for people who want to put on solar panels, people who want to help small business become energy efficient. All of these are opportunities that build on each other, because as we continue to deploy, prices will get cheaper, our ability to deploy will get better, the capital cost will come down, and it's very much worth doing. It's a job creation opportunity, it's economic opportunity. So every state in CARICOM has very ambitious renewable energy targets. But how are we doing in terms of these renewable energy targets? Not so well, sad to say. The graph before you shows 3 numbers. In the blue, for each country, you'll see the 2009 percentage of renewable energy as a percentage of the overall installed capacity in the country. In green, you will see the national target by 2027 that is proposed by the CARICOM Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy. And in red, you see the national target. And as you can see, lots of very ambitious numbers in the green and the red. But in terms of the blue, in terms of where we were as far as 2019, end of 2019, for the most part, we're not where we need to be. And I want to give you an idea of how far we are. If you were to take Barbados, for instance, right? And Barbados has set the excellent goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030. If they were to attain that goal, it would require compound annual growth rates for renewable energy percentages that exceed world historic targets or world historic figures, right? The same is true for most of the countries you see before you. We're talking about compound annual growth rates of usually above 10%, in some cases as high as 38%. Like every year you're adding 38% more renewable energy than you had the year before. Meanwhile, globally, in the best of cases, growth rates for renewable energy farms has been maybe 30% in the case of solar in some countries, and usually in the realm of 10 to 12%. And so it seems like we're not on target to meet the targets that we have set for ourselves. And we set them for good reasons that we want to meet them, but it's difficult to do so because of some of these overlapping crises we spoke about before. To use Barbados as another example, the Prime Minister, Miamor Motley, recently said that because of the COVID crisis and what that has done to government fiscal situations, it may be that they'll have to rethink and revisit that renewable energy target. And it's reflected in their NDC to the Paris Accord, their updated one. They're going to require more intervention from the international community if we're going to meet these targets. And I think the case of Barbados is typical across the region. We have ambitious targets. We've been hit by COVID, and we were already being hit by our economic situations. And though we want to get where we need to go, it may be difficult for us to go there unless we find extra measures or we seek extra outside help. This slide kind of underlines it a little bit more in a bit more detail. You see the compound annual growth rates required on your right-hand side. These are calculated in-house at CCRI using the data we have. In some of the cases, the data was incomplete, and so we couldn't make a robust calculation. But generally speaking, CARICOM targets are very ambitious, and it's particularly so for some of the countries that are thinking of geothermal strategies. Solar strategies may allow for faster growth because solar has done better and deploys more quickly, generally speaking, but given the size of these islands, even one single geothermal project can completely change the game. So it's not out of reach. Now, given all of these factors, what do we need to do in order to make the energy revolution happen? I think there are 5 areas, they all conveniently start with P, that we need to think about. First off is policy, and I think we're already far down the wicket on that. CARICOM countries have set some very good policies, very ambitious targets, and they are backing those up with incentives in many cases. For example, many countries are providing tax incentives for the installation of renewable energy or for the retrofitting of facilities for energy efficiency. We can go further in terms of policy. With CrossQ, thinking about CrossQ in particular, I think there's a lot of room for growth in terms of energy standards and testing and making those standards mandatory rather than optional. I think those sort of policies can push the energy revolution to where it needs to be. Planning is also a major issue. The COTE, the Council for Trade and Economic Development, has recently agreed that across the region, we need to move towards integrated resource and resilience planning, particularly looking towards about 2023. That is to say, every country needs to think in a holistic way in their electricity sectors of how they're going to achieve resilience, how they're going to manage their resources in a long-term fashion, and put those all together. There are barriers to that, particularly around human capacity and the resources we have to do this sort of planning, which is why people is really at the center of what we're thinking about. And it's a very hard thing for CARICOM countries to think about. If there are any civil servants in the audience, they would know that we Caribbean people are very, very good at what we do, but we are in many cases overstretched. The kinds of things that you have civil servants who are responsible for pushing the energy transition doing in a CARICOM country, in a better resource country, you'd have 15 people doing the same sort of job. And I'm not just pulling this out of the air. There was a study done by GIZ that assessed the capacities across the region for managing the energy transition in terms of technical capacities, planning capacities, fiscal resources, a whole gamut of necessary functions and capacities that a government must have. At best, some countries and some agencies were at 40% of necessary capacity. At worst, they were about 8%. So that signals to us that either you're going to have to double or maybe multiply by 12 the amount of in-government capacity you have to really make these sorts of projects and initiatives happen. It's impossible given our fiscal situation, which is why partnership becomes so important. And I'm not just talking about leaning on our development partners or traditional development partners outside. I'm talking about CARICOM helping CARICOM, talking about regionalism. It's why you have bodies like CrossQ, it's why you have bodies like the 5Cs, and it's why you have CCRI. Because unless we pool our resources, work together, share lessons, we're not going to have the sort of capacity that we need. But if we come together, all of a sudden our capacities can multiply by 15 because there are 15 nations in CARICOM. We can do better if we pursue partnership. And then with those elements together, then we can get really to the meat of the matter, which is projects. All the talk does not really matter unless you are putting something on the ground. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters unless you are building new power plants, unless you're retrofitting facilities, unless you're making capital available for those sorts of activities. I believe that if we get those other elements together in terms of the planning, in terms of human capacity, in terms of forming the right partnerships and setting the right policy framework, then we can reach where we need to reach, even though our targets are ambitious. I will close there. Apologies, I did intend to have a quite different presentation, but literally things froze up while you were talking, Latoya. But I'm happy to answer any questions and expand on some of these points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you as well, Gerald. It was a very interesting presentation, never mind, especially talking about the types of growth that's going to be necessary, the compound growth that's going to be necessary in our countries if we really want to reach the targets, and the issues of the cost of energy across the region. Those are the kinds of things that we know we have to consider and that we know we need to have dialogue about. So thank you very much for that presentation, Gerald. So with the stage set, we will flow into how quality infrastructure, as Gerald would have mentioned before, one of the critical areas going forward is going to be how we put standards in place, what kind of measurement infrastructure is there to assist with the development of the energy sector. So to look at how quality infrastructure actually fits into energy sustainability and the climate change agenda, we are going to now move to a discussion with Mr. Jose Eduardo Trejo, the director of the Belize Bureau of Standards and also one of the members of the CrossQ Board of Directors. Mr. Trejo is a career public officer with 20 years of experience working with the government of Belize. Prior to joining this service, he worked with the Central Bank of Belize as a junior economist, having direct responsibility for the compilation of Belize balance of payments statistics. An economist by training, he holds a Master of Arts degree in International Affairs with a concentration in development economics. With a published thesis dissertation on valuing marine projected areas in Belize, a case study using contingent valuation methodology to determine tourists' willingness to spend, Mr. Trejo is eager to share his knowledge and mentor young professionals in academia. He has served in the capacity as adjunct professor in economics at the University of the West Indies Continuing School of Studies in Belize and the University of Belize and Galen University. During the period 2015 to 2017, he served as the chairman of the CrossQ, and as the current director of the Belize Bureau of Standards, his department falls within the portfolio of the Ministry of Agriculture, Food Security, and Enterprise. Mr. Trejo has served as the head of the Belize Bureau of Standards since October of 2007. So, Mr. Trejo, I invite you to take over.
Thank you, Latoya. Pleasant good morning to everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the previous presenter for setting the stage to smoothly transition into the presentation relating to quality and standards. We're very pleased to be here this morning, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. Quality infrastructure is not always the easiest pill to swallow, but we'll do our very best to show its importance in energy sustainability. So sorry. So the presentation basically is to introduce you to CrossQ. You heard a little bit from Mr. Omar in his opening remarks. And he spoke a little bit about quality infrastructure and what CrossQ is doing to develop the regional quality infrastructure, not to mention the national quality infrastructures of the 15 member states. We're going to talk a little bit about the CrossQ's energy mandate and to speak on the importance of why quality infrastructure is important to sustainable energy. And most importantly, to speak of the initiatives at the regional level to fulfill the energy policy mandate at the regional level. So speaking on CrossQ and other initiatives at the national level. So as Mr. Omar mentioned earlier, the CrossQ is basically the 15 member states of CARICOM, and its headquarters is based in Barbados. It was established some 19 years ago through the Article 67 of the revised treaty, the RTC. And as he briefly mentioned, CrossQ's mandate, our mandate is really to develop and harmonize regional quality infrastructure for all the things that he mentioned this morning. So talking about and looking at trade facilitation, looking at how we enhance efficiency in the production and processes in the development of delivery and goods and services, improving quality of goods that we trade in the community and with third states. And of course, the most important of all is never to take our eye off the importance of our role in consumer and environmental protection. So quite briefly, we really taking our cue from the previous slide, looking at quality infrastructure. We always try to do our best to explain the importance of quality infrastructure, and this is the wheel that we normally use. Quality infrastructure, the wheels start spinning for quality infrastructure, looking at starting off with standardization. I know my colleagues in the standard development area would be happy for me to say that, but I do honestly believe that I don't know that a quality infrastructure takes momentum or has any motion if we don't look at it from a standardization perspective. I think that's the basis of it. If we're going to improve goods and delivery of services, as you heard the previous presenter, Mr. Lindo mentioned that standardization and looking at voluntary and more monetary standards in the area of the energy sector is important. So technical regulations, setting those requirements, that is important. I think it's if you're going to jump out of the gates, it has to be with standardization. So with that, then there comes the element of metrology, because obviously you need to test, obviously you need to measure, and metrology is a critical component of the quality infrastructure. So ensuring that we have the ability to measure and ensure that the facilities we have in the region have the competency to do measurements along the various lines and branches, such as scientific, industrial, and legal metrology. Then there's the element of conformity assessment, where we're looking at the elements of inspection, testing, and certification, and ultimately ending with accreditation. But throughout the entire system, you need to have competent authorities, bodies to be able to do inspection, so that we ensure. I think this is one of the major pillars of our quality infrastructure system, conformity assessment. I don't know that standards and metrology makes any sense, and this is there's an open debate, but I don't know that standardization and metrology makes any sense if you cannot have the conformity assessment framework in place to ensure that you can test against a standard, that you can measure against a standard. So inspections and so on is very important, and especially for the topic that we're discussing today, energy efficiency, would require some market surveillance, looking at the minimum energy performance standards, looking at evaluating documents for equivalence between countries and trading partners. So that's important. And again, I mentioned the issue of testing. Countries require the ability to test, and we have to ensure that our laboratories and our facilities across the region are internationally recognized and ensuring that they operate based on international standards. So that's critical for us to ensure that our trading partners have a level of assurance and confidence that our facilities are meeting certain international standards. And certification, we need to know that the personnel who are working in a laboratory or factory, wherever, that there are certification systems that is driving production, driving services. So certification is critical, and ultimately accreditation, making sure that there is competency and that our system is internationally recognized, is very critical for us. And then ultimately for us is ensuring our homegrown pillar of quality promotions enters into the equation, because Again, quality infrastructure is something that we have been trying to develop over the last 15 years, and it has grown. The momentum for quality infrastructure has grown. The appetite for quality infrastructure is growing. We're seeing a lot of interconnectivity with various sectors at the national and regional level. So promoting it, communicating it at every corner, at every twist and turn, we need to ensure that quality promotions is there driving the message for why quality infrastructure is really important to our region. So developing that knowledge base and educating at every level for us is critical if quality infrastructure is going to have a rightful place in national and regional development. So looking at a snapshot of CrossQ's energy mandate, it starts with looking at the international agreements and policies. So looking at the Kyoto Protocol, looking at the SDGs, and basically alignment, looking at the national agendas and the regional agenda. And you've heard a mouthful already about what we're doing at the regional level and the challenges we are facing with high energy costs and trying to improve competitiveness and looking at savings. So that is part of at the core of the CARICOM energy policy. And so how do we fit into the picture as a regional body? Well, we got our mandate for the first quoted meeting, which is the Council for Trade and Economic Development. We were mandated as a regional organization to develop standards. So we started off with looking at the building codes for the region, and then we moved into developing our standards for household appliances, looking at refrigerators, air conditioners, CFLs, LEDs. So these are the regional standards that we are currently working on. I think with the exception of the air conditions, we already have these as CARICOM regional standards. We are at the first draft CARICOM regional standards for the air conditions, if I'm not mistaken. But these are some of the things that we're talking about. We all also would like to point out the importance of standards and the work that we're doing for renewable energy standards for solar water heaters and photovoltaic panels. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, our energy roadmap is already in motion, and we're trying to ensure that the quality infrastructure, as I mentioned, has a part to play in a critical sector like this. As Mr. Linda mentioned, is one of the most difficult and critical issues of regional development. So, in essence, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and looking at the 5 Ps and trying to identify with how quality infrastructure will help us in fulfilling this objective, making sure that that we get to that point of having affordable and clean energy at the regional level, and ensuring that there is responsible consumption at national and regional level, and is critical. So quality infrastructure, this is basically what we have been trying to do as a regional body to ensure that we align our strategic position to fulfill these objectives here. So this is very critical for us as a regional body, and making the case. I think that this is really ultimately what CrossQ has been trying to do over the last decade and a half, is to make a case for quality infrastructure, and making sure that there is integration and there's correlation and there's cohesion. It's not always looked at as an element for the achievement of some of these goals, but this is why we place a lot of emphasis on trying to make that connectivity at the global level, specifically on the Sustainable Development Goals. We all have our eyes set on these 17 goals. It's quite a challenge with the limited resources that we have at all levels, and so making sure that this system here works for us is ultimately our objective. Then there's the issue of looking at the relationship of quality infrastructure and sustainable energy and the connectivity. The importance of first of all, I don't know that we get into to understand how quality infrastructure is relevant to sustainable energy. If we don't understand what sustainable energy is, but this is something I believe all of us are quite cognizant of, and ensuring that we can meet our energy needs for the future in a manner that doesn't really compromise the energy needs of for our future generations. So making sure that they're produced from sources that can be used repeatedly without depletion. You heard about Belize and other countries, Guyana, Jamaica, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and using hydropower as a means of as a source of energy. So these are some of the things that we have our eyes on. I think it's gaining momentum. Some of the things that we're mentioning here is just a start. So in the area of policy and strategies and looking at it within that context, we are really looking at renewable energy sources. Some of the examples that we have here, looking at wind, hydro, solar, marine, and geothermal. In energy efficiencies, looking at the conservation of energy consumption, relating to those traditional fossil fuel sources. So is where, so in the case of just as a
Your audio, Mr. Trejo.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So looking at the two pillars of sustainable energy, renewable energy, non-renewable energy, some of the examples that we gave, wind and energy, solar energy, hydroelectricity, and geothermal energy in some instances. This is basically our focus, and how we turn the tables is trying to ensure again that we embed quality infrastructure in all of this, so that it can make its rightful contribution in achieving our regional objectives. So why quality for sustainable energy? Well, as I mentioned to you, all the pillars of quality infrastructure can be should be incorporated in systems and processes, in particular for energy systems. So looking at standards, we're looking at guiding the energy production and delivery and safety from a metrological perspective, ensuring the right, we pursue measurements, and ensuring that there's measurements are embedded in our energy efficiency goals, in productivity. Of course, always ensuring that there is fairness in the system, and being able to quantify it from a production perspective. And as I mentioned to you, all conformity assessment is affirming and giving confidence and ensuring competence, and with sustainable efficiency, safety, and resiliency and parameters. I think, as I mentioned to you all, I don't know that the two pillars of standards and metrology makes any sense without conformity assessment. So that's critical for us. Then there's the element, as I mentioned to you, the quality promotions, making sure that stakeholders have their eye on quality infrastructure, understanding the benefits of quality infrastructure and the impacts of it with respect to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And just for your purposes, I don't want to dwell too much on this, but our goal is really to try to establish a currency for our national quality infrastructure, currency for our regional quality infrastructure, and the way we do that is to ensure that the quality infrastructure framework is embedded at the national and regional level, so that there is this perfect harmonization and confluence and integration of the various elements that you see here. So accreditation, certification, standardization, the testing, the inspection, metrology, all of these will help us to develop, to have that currency at the international level, so that our systems can be recognized at the international level. So all these international bodies on the right hand side of this equation, starting from the WTO with the ISO, the IEC, the OIML, the International Organization for Legal Metrology, the Bureau for International Weights and Measures, the International Accreditation Forum. These systems there are we need to ensure that our system functions to meet the requirements of the international system. So looking at the value chain for us is looking at a particular sector, and starting off with for the energy sector is to basically dissect the sector and looking at the various elements of the sector, and to see looking at how quality infrastructure can help facilitate with making our system recognizable and having that international recognition. Is looking at your power stations, and you're looking at the different production of components, the installations, the energy generation, storage, transmission, distribution, the consumption. All of these elements here are what are part of is the basis on which we would look to ensure that we put in place technical regulations, standards to ensure that the quality infrastructure framework supports the system, supports the sector. So this is really the essence of our work. And again, we're talking about energy here, but this system here is so dynamic. It applies to agriculture, it applies to the environment, it applies to tourism. So it's such a robust and dynamic system, and this is the beauty of quality infrastructure and how it can help us to get that international recognition that we need. So just to speak quickly about the quality infrastructure for sustainable energy in CARICOM, some of the initiatives that I mentioned already, but apart from the regional energy efficiency labeling scheme for the energy appliances that I previously mentioned, we're about to pilot that in some of the countries. Belize is one of those countries where we are at the point of initiating or piloting program for energy and labeling scheme. So we're quite excited about that. Something that we have been working on for quite some time. And then from the point of view of the other elements, the other initiatives, we have our CARICOM Energy Efficiency Study Companion that was developed in 2018. We have the Regional Energy Efficiency Building and Code document that was prepared. I have to confess that I haven't read that document because it's really very technical, and it's for those experts in the region and professionals to use as a guide. And then there is the Energy Efficiency Code Essentials that we developed as well in 2018. This is just an example of a building in the region that conforms to energy efficiency building code. But I'm told that this is a building that was done even before we got to the point of putting in the regional building code standards, having the guides. But it just goes to show that we are always trying to chase the market, and so we're trying to ensure that our quality infrastructure system is in tandem with market needs. So we always talk about creating a demand-oriented quality infrastructure system, and so that we are not always chasing the market, but that we're ahead of the market. But this is just an example of an energy efficiency building. This is the One Welch's building in St. Thomas, Barbados. I think I'm told it was built in 2016. And just for a fun fact, I understand that the One Welch is building 56 bay solar carport that you see there on the right hand side generates electricity to power the center center manager's electric car on more than 50 trips around the world. So something just to wrap your mind around. Again, this is just to show the importance. The importance of quality infrastructure. As an example, this is it's it's one thing to speak of it theoretically. It's another thing to speak of it in its application and how relevant it is. So for us, looking at solar water heaters is these are the elements, and I mentioned to you previously, standardization. What would be applicable to the solar water heaters? Looking at the relevant standards, ISO standards, IEC standards that are key for solar water heaters. Looking at the measurement system for appliances, looking for solar water heaters, the elements of temperature, the durability, the efficiency of the solar water heater, all the parameters that we need to put in place for that. Those are critical for measurements, and of course testing. We need to ensure that the devices, the solar water heaters, really perform and meet the requirements as laid out in a technical requirement. Certifying these or looking at certification systems that are applicable for solar water heaters, and again the element of accreditation and making sure that there is confidence in the measurement system, confidence in basically the quality infrastructure framework that we're trying to develop for this particular sector. So this is basically quality infrastructure in motion, quality infrastructure in its application. Not always the easiest for us to convey, but it's really how quality infrastructure helps to start piece together the elements of the pillars to achieve our objectives. Just some examples in the region. We have geothermal energy. I can't remember which particular country is geothermal energy, but we also have wind energy. And I think Jamaica is one of the countries that are pushing for wind energy, and they have some investments and are innovating in this area. Then this is the other examples. Again, we already mentioned, and in the area of hydropower, we're now seeing again the market pushing towards the use of electric motor vehicles. Belize being one of them. I think Trinidad, Barbados. We do not currently have any standards for this. So this is something that we are we have our eyes on, and it's on our it's something that we're looking at and working already at the national and regional level on how do we insert ourselves and what role we will play. And so going forward is again, we start off with creating that awareness and raising the level of education with respect to energy efficiency and renewable energy, and how quality infrastructure plays that role. Taking that discussion at the private sector level with our public sector counterparts. This is for us is the nucleus of trying to ensure that quality infrastructure is at the forefront of the national development agenda, of the regional development agenda, and how it can play that role in developing and implementing in developing and implementing energy policies at all levels, and ensuring that again, like our quality infrastructure is not too far behind, that we are making the right investments in quality infrastructure to serve the current needs in a particular sector. Again, resources are not always where we want them to be, but we are trying to do our very best to ensure that we develop the QI framework, making sure that we have the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and of course, most importantly, the competency for energy efficiency professionals in this area. So making sure that we have people trained in the energy code for energy code inspections, energy auditors, doing the monitoring, the verification, the enforcement and compliance of the energy programs, and as I mentioned, equipping the laboratories. Quite costly, heavy investments, but they have to be smart investments. for us to ensure that there is balance in using of the very scarce resources that we have individually as national standards bodies, and of course at the regional level at CrossQ. So that's basically my presentation. I want to thank you for your time and for listening. I hope that if anything, you understand the importance of quality infrastructure and understanding how the pillars, the confluence of the pillars and how robust the system is, and its the potential contribution that it has, not only for the energy sector, but for all other key elements of our economies. Thank you very much.
And thank you as well, Mr. Trejo, for making the linkages between what we are doing in QI, as well as how that fits into energy and how it makes the link to what we're looking at in our region in relation to climate change. Our final addition to the discussion today, of course, is to bring you the elements of climate change, a topic that has become a watchword and which we still always need to learn more about. Today's presentation on energy and climate change comes from the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, more locally known as the 5Cs. Dr. Daniel Kane is a senior project development specialist at the 5Cs and has a PhD in economics. His major experiences are in the areas of applied econometrics, international trade, economic research, climate change, academia, project evaluation and appraisal, and central banking. He was the lead project developer for the project Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Sustainability in Barbados and spearheaded the development of several approved Green Climate Fund readiness and preparation support projects. He has worked as a resource economist for over 2 years, carrying out economic modeling to estimate the potential impact of climate change on the Caribbean and offer technical assistance to others conducting feasibility studies and climate change economic impact assessments. He was also responsible for the appraisal and adaptation and mitigation projects implemented in the Caribbean. Most notably are those pilot projects implemented by the Special Adaptation to Climate Change Project. With these experiences, Mr. Kane continues to utilize his knowledge and skills to support CARICOM member states, develop projects and programs to enable access to climate finance to support the Caribbean's development of resilience to climate change. The floor is now yours, Dr. Kane. Your mic isn't on.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. And good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the two previous presenters before me. You're able to see my presentation, right?
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much to the presenters before me. I think you laid it down. I noticed that both presenters have 5 Ps with some overlap in those Ps. And now 5Cs is presenting something about the number 5 this morning. I'll be doing a presentation on energy and climate change as was identified before. I'm a project development specialist with the 5Cs. I'm an economist by training. I'm in no way an energy expert of the sort, but I've had to work very closely with energy experts in the region in the articulation of climate change projects that involve the energy sector. And so there's some knowledge. I want to take some time though to set the tone for my presentation on the back end. My presentation will cover just some background to what is climate change and how the energy sector fits in with the issue of climate change. And then I'll get into some of what the center does and some of the work we have done and how those work could be scaled and replicated going forward. If you're seeing my screen, I promise you this is the only slide that has more than 100 words on it. And I particularly decided that this was the route I was going to go with this slide. I had a very nice diagram there that showed CO2 emissions rising above pre-industrial area, and I decided to delete it. I decided to put these words here because these aren't my words. They are the words of scientists around the world telling us about the potential impact that climate change will have on our society. We tend not to read these things because we are caught up with all the other things. So I'm going to ask that we take a minute to listen to the scientists on this. A part of this group of scientists is our very own Professor Taylor out of the University of the West Indies that has done some work on the UNFCCC special report on climate change. It is important that we read these things. The very first bullet point there is the abstract from the paper, and I ask you to just take some time to read that, and I will read the second paragraph, but I want you to just take 20 seconds to at least read the abstract of the paper. The title of the paper is the Human Imperative of Stabilizing Global Climate Change at 1.5. Current emissions reduction commitments are inadequate and risk throwing many nations into chaos and harm, with a particular vulnerability of poor people. To avoid this, we must accelerate action and tighten emissions reduction targets so that they fall in line with the Paris Agreement. This is much less costly than suffering the impacts of 2 degrees Celsius or more of climate change. In a sense, if you take some time after this to read this paper, what it's saying is that the effects of climate change are already on us. Climate change has risen already above 1 degree Celsius, and we're approaching 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we will feel the effects of climate change no matter what, even if we are able to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, if we do breach that 1.5 degrees Celsius and we move towards the next threshold, that's there, it's a 2 degrees Celsius, the impacts are even more damning. But as it is, we are already feeling the effects of 1.5 degrees Celsius change with climate change. So what can we do? There are 2 things that we as a region must do. We must adapt and we must mitigate. I deliberately started with adaptation. And I'm going to explain what each of those. I won't take for granted that persons here understand adaptation and mitigation. Because talking to climate change people, we take for granted that everybody understands it. I've borrowed these 2 figures that you're seeing on the screen from the Green Climate Fund, which is the multilateral finance mechanism set up under the UNFCCC Convention on Climate Change, which speaks to the area, the strategic areas that the fund or the climate fund invests in countries. When one talks about adaptation, what we're talking about is the need to put in place actions that allow us to cope with the impacts of climate change. It also reduces the risk and the severity of the impacts of these climatic events on our society. When we talk about mitigation, what we're talking about is reducing the emissions, the greenhouse gas that are emitted into the atmosphere, which is really what is creating this warming of the climate, warming of our environment, and then that has knock-on effects where we get other extremes such as hurricanes and that sort of thing. So these 4 different strategic areas within adaptation and mitigation are areas that the Green Climate Fund has identified. And under the adaptation, we could talk about health, food, water security, building resilience in that sector, building resilience, the livelihood of people and community, increase the resilience of infrastructure and built environment, increase the resilience of our ecosystems and ecosystem services. On the other hand, we have mitigation, where we're trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. associated with energy generation and access, transport, forests and land use, buildings, cities, and appliances. So I hope you could walk away from this presentation understanding more clearly the difference between adaptation and mitigation. But if you notice when you look at this, the area where energy shows up is under mitigation. But as I as I proceed through this presentation, you will see that I'm bringing energy also into the adaptation space. I want to take some time to just, again, set the context of greenhouse gas emissions and place CARICOM member states and the Caribbean in this context. What you're looking at is the share of global emissions, the Caribbean's share of global emissions. The dotted line is just a trend line, which shows that from 2011, and this is World Bank data, from 2011 to 2018, there's a downward trend in the share of emissions. But yes, there's a downward trend, but I want you to look at that number on the axis. It says 0.14%. It means that the Caribbean or CARICOM member states emit 0.14% of total emissions globally. So even if we were to go to 100% renewable and our emission goes to zero, and remember the energy is just one aspect of our emissions. There are other aspects of emissions such as emissions from agriculture, land clearing, and that sort of thing. But if we were even to go to zero with our emissions, we still would not impact global emissions that is needed. As such, we need other members or other countries in the world to do their part in reducing greenhouse gases. This also shows the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and the axis on the right, that 40 million kilotons of greenhouse gas is for the world. And you could see again that downward trend in emissions in the Caribbean, which is that yellow line. Gerard would have presented that the countries have set ambitions and they're moving things, but it's slow. But there are efforts that are on the way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and you can see that showing up in the data. So the Caribbean is doing its part as it relates to the greenhouse gas emissions. Just to give you a picture of what's happening at the country-specific level, and I don't want us to walk away here condemning any one of our member states for what's happening here. As I said before, our levels of emissions when compared to the world is 0.12% of total emissions. But you could see the biggest emitter in the region is Trinidad, and one could understand why that is, the oil sector that it has and the industries that exist there, followed by Haiti, Jamaica. So the bigger countries of the CARICOM region are the ones producing emissions. I zeroed in on the OECD Organization of Eastern Caribbean States to see what that looks like, and you could see it's fairly even across the with the exception of Antigua and Barbuda, but it's very even across the OECS member states. And then I just wanted to show this because it's important to look at, what is the emissions per capita of CARICOM member states. And we're not doing so bad. This is again World Bank data using the average over the last, over the period 2011 to 2018. And you could see that with the exception of TT and Bahamas, the energy per capita is almost on par with what the world, that green line is the average CO2 per capita at world standards, across the entire world, what it looks like. When you take a very close look at these numbers, what you're seeing are some of the countries that really depend on tourism showing up above there. But even Barbados, which is really dependent on tourism, still is doing well. So there's no shame in where we are. But as what I want you to take away from this is that our CO2 emission when compared to global emissions is very minimal. And even if tomorrow we were to stop emitting or dent in the total stock or the total amount of CO2 being emitted would be very, very minimal. I'll pause here just to talk a little bit and get back to the issue, talk a little bit about what the 5 Cs is doing and what we do and how we're doing what we do. We're working with CARICOM member states to expand early warning and the predictive and observational facility and Cruise Network. Cruise Network is a coral reef early warning system in the Caribbean. So we're working very closely with member states to do this. We're supporting in the development of climate resilience, and we're doing that through the development of project development and implementation of projects with member states. We'll talk a little bit about some of those that we have done already and at least one that we have in the pipeline, primarily associated with the energy sector. We're also, raising awareness and carrying outreach program. I mean, this forum affords me an opportunity to bring that sort of climate change knowledge to the public, and I'm grateful for that. So we continue that sort of work, and our work in this space span from as early as primary school all the way up to our policymakers in terms of raising awareness about climate change, but also enhance education about climate change, not just awareness. And of course, we are promoting our risk management framework and an ethos in the Caribbean for us to do better planning and consider the risks associated with climate change in whatever form of work that we do. So this in a nutshell summarizes some of the work that the 5 Cs do. If the ED was looking on, he'd probably think I didn't do justice because we're doing way more than this, but I tried my best to summarize what it is that we're actually doing. Our work is guided by the regional framework for development resilient to climate change. This regional framework was recently revised, and as part of that revised framework, we now have 11 strategic elements or strategic areas we'll be working in. And I just want to bring your attention to strategic element number 3, which talks about the reduction of reliance on fossil fuel. But that is just one aspect which specifically engages the energy sector. But I'm sure there are other elements such as strategic element 1, strategic element 2, that really also will involve some of the work that we do. So we have a regional framework, and accompanying this regional framework, we have an implementation plan, and that implementation plan is about to be revised and costed fully. But in trying to carry out our mandate, which is really to coordinate the region's response to climate change, and I want to pause here to say, even though the 5 Cs has the mandate to coordinate the region's response to climate change, to borrow from a colleague of mine from Bahamas that says, like tourism is everybody's business, climate change is everybody's business. It is with our partners that we are able to carry out that mandate, and our partners are the persons here. So I'm hoping after this presentation or after this forum, we're able to impact somebody who is then able to impact somebody else and support us in our effort to coordinate the region's response to climate change. Well, I have a list here, and these days I feel real bad putting this up because our partnerships are expanding. I think this P cut across the 2 presentations before. and we have found that this is a very important part of the work that we do. Why? The 5Cs run a very lean machine. And when I say lean machine, we don't have experts in every area. So if it is an energy related matter, I will be looking to Dr. Jackson or Dr. Garden from CARICOM or Gerard from CECA to gather knowledge or guide us in the implementation of that project in the energy sector. I'm going to be honest that not until the presentation minutes ago that I would have gotten a more in-depth knowledge. I understood what CrossQ did, but understanding even more what CrossQ brings to the table and how CrossQ could fit into some of the work we're doing and become even a deeper partner. We have partnered with CrossQ in the past, but there is opportunity for deeper collaboration with CrossQ. But as you could see there, we partner with a lot of organizations, regional and national agencies, universities, University of Belize, the University of the West, and the University of Guyana are our partners. So I just wanted to leave this here. It's important that we partner to be able to coordinate the region's response to climate change. I joined the center in 2011, fresh out of from my master's and a year lecturing at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. And one of the first set of actions I had to do was to appraise some projects that were being implemented as part of the Special Program for Adaptation to Climate Change. And this was said to me by one of my colleagues. I believe it was Dr. Bynum or Dr. Ulrich Trotz. That mitigation is a good adaptation strategy. And for a while I was puzzled as to why that was. So I just presented to you that no matter what we do in terms of the mitigation space in reducing our CO2 emissions by adopting energy efficiency and renewable energy, we still need to adapt to climate change. But we have found that you can't disentangle the two for the Caribbean. It is important that in whatever we do in terms of mitigation, adaptation is at the forefront of our mind because we're already feeling the impacts of climate change. And so mitigation is a good adaptation strategy. And no better project to demonstrate this. So this one was one of the projects that I had to appraise and I just joined. No better project demonstrate this. This is Bequia in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. What you're seeing I hope that's on your left, is what we call a reverse osmosis plant, turning salt water into fresh water. And the other picture is a solar PV on top of a building, not too far away from the plant, but also at the airport, providing energy. Now, at the time when this was being implemented, this was 2010, 2011, the battery technology was very young in its infancy, and it was very costly. The main thing here was for us to put in place a water system because the country or the island of Bequia predominantly depended on rainwater for its supply, for its domestic purposes. And in the event that rainwater was not available, they would have to barge water in from mainland St. Vincent. And so we put in place a reverse osmosis plant. But the energy required to drive this reverse osmosis plant was enormous. There was no way that this plant could be tied into the grid and it remained sustainable and viable. It would become a costly venture for the government to be able to provide this water at an affordable price to the residents of the island. And so what we did was we sized a PV panel that would be able to generate enough energy, to power the RO plant. But not only to power the plant, there was excess revenue that would be sold into the grid, and the excess revenue from that excess energy would go into a fund that would allow for the maintenance of these RO plants. If anybody knows much about RO plants, you need membranes, and those need to be changed on a regular basis, and that sort of thing. As I mentioned earlier, battery technology was in its infancy, and so this PV panel had to be tied into the grid. An agreement with VINLEC, that's the utility responsible for energy in St. Vincent, had to allow for a sort of net metering or approach here. And I could tell you at that point in time, the legislation was not in place to allow for those sort of things. And so this project, this pilot project, I said 2011, really served as an example of how, one, we are dealing with the issues of water in the island, but also dealing with the issues of energy. And Gerard touched on it earlier, and I won't get into that economics behind all this, the move to renewable energy. One could get into the analysis of that and see that it's a no-brainer in terms of moving to renewable energy. But here we're talking about us needing to build resilience in the water sector, and we are also considering renewable energy as part of it. Just to say, this project has been replicated in Carriacou, it has been replicated in one of the islands here at a smaller scale in Belize, San Pedro, I think, or was it Kikok, I can't remember, but it also is replicated in Petit Martinique in the Grenadines as well. Another project, just as an example, and I want to talk a little bit here, this is the Water Sector Resilience Nexus for Sustainability in Barbados. That project has about 4 components. The first one really deals with the energy aspect, and I'm going to delve into that a little bit. The second component is really a revolving fund for adaptation. The third component deals with dealing with issues of non-revenue water and putting in place decision-making tools to support climate change adaptation. And the last bit is the public awareness and capacity building. The first component, as I said, talked about energy, and the idea here is to put in place renewable energy to support the production and distribution of water in Barbados. Part of the issue here is that whenever we have a hurricane, one of the first things that is impacted is the grid. And if it is your water supply system, and I know my colleagues in Barbados could attest to this because a recent storm passed, or hurricane, I think it passed as a Category 1 hurricane, impacted power, and water went down for quite a while. But this is one of the most essential elements of protecting life and saving life in the aftermath of a disaster. And as such, whilst one might think of renewable energy here as really mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, we are talking about building resilience into the water sector of Barbados through the implementation of renewable energy. And this for me is what really defines that issue of mitigation being a good adaptation strategy, all right? This is just a PV system at the Bowmanston station, pumping station there in Barbados. I won't take too long, I know I've gone some time. Just showing some of the PV, but the project intends to put in place 4.5 megawatt of PV system to support water sector resiliency in Barbados. I heard earlier, so energy really cuts across all these sectors. Here is a school in Bahamas. This was a project we implemented with support from the Italian government to retrofit a school. Whilst you're only seeing the PV on the roof, more was done because it also implemented energy efficiency, lighting and AC units within the school. It also retrofitted the windows, allow for, keep the AC in and that sort of thing. But energy cuts across all the sectors. We're talking about transport. There's the presentation previously spoke about EVs. We have a project that's coming on stream. We're hoping to pilot. CCRI is a part of that. Also partnering with GIZ and other CDB and other CARICOM members to really look at some flagship projects for the energy sector. We're talking mainly at the transport sector, putting in place electric buses and vehicles, and looking at the feasibility and generating that information necessary to catalyze private sector investment in this space. Drip irrigation, solar pumps are also things that are being considered and utilized in the agricultural sector. I think the Adaptation Fund project that Jamaica recently implemented had some elements of drip irrigation and solar pumps. And so energy cuts across all sectors. I want to leave colleagues here with this, and it's something that Irina has adopted and is pushing, and in fact, it is something we are looking very closely at. When one thinks of climate change, there are these elements that we must safeguard: food security, water security, and energy security. This nexus is critical, and I think this diagram summarizes the interconnectedness between our economic systems, and in particular, the interconnectedness between energy, water, and food. And one needs to look very closely at how it is we could build out those standards. I heard CrossQ mention the need for these regional quality infrastructure. One would want to think of what those standards could look like in a nexus of this nature: energy, food, and water. How are these products produced? What is the CO2 footprint associated with that sort of goods? So what does this look like, and what standards could we implement to ensure that we're considering this energy food nexus? Energy, water, and food nexus. The last thing I want to leave you with is, as I said, the FICES really does both project development and implementation. I've showed you some pilot projects we've done, and this is a project that is in the pipeline that we're working on for Belize, and it's really showcasing another aspect of energy, which is biomass, and this probably will be applicable to those larger islands or larger countries of CARICOM, such as Suriname, Belize, Guyana, Jamaica, and maybe Trinidad. Really, the production of biomass for energy generation. But as part of this project as well, because of the size of Belize, we're talking about microgrids, because there are certain rural areas, certain villages that are without energy. And so we're looking to put in place microgrids, microgeneration, energy efficiency solution. We're talking about retrofitting public schools, public buildings, government buildings, and polyclinics. And I think as part of that, there is an activity in there related to standard, and it could be that activity that a previous presenter mentioned. And of course, we're strengthening the energy sector to be able to create the necessary planning, knowledge, financing necessary to transform beyond this project, the energy sector of Belize. So this here showcases a project that we're developing. The first picture shows us working with Cardi, and Cardi is looking at what they call the taxonomy of the grass. We're using a wild cane here as the feedstock for biomass, and the next picture is showing what it looks like when it's shredded and dried and ready to be combust for energy generation. And with that, I thank you. I hope my presentation was informative. And you could connect, as you could see on screen, my email address is there. You could always connect with me by sending me an email at the email address that's on screen. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. We are running a little over time, but I'm going to ask the audience to bear with us for about 10 minutes. Let's just see if we can at least get through about 2 questions or so. There was one that came in earlier o'clock that asked, can the claiming of carbon credits require the creation and implementation of legislation that benefits the end users during the transition to carbon neutrality? Mr. Lindo responded that carbon credits may have a role to play. However, unless the prices go up and market access issues are sorted out, certified emission reductions may be a marginal driver to the energy transition rather than the central one. Gerald, would you wish to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. And I should mention, I did spend a bit of time on the executive board of the Clean Development Mechanism of the UN. They are responsible for certifying emission reductions under the Kyoto Protocol. So that's how carbon credits were applied to the project, or the projects, I should say. There was this long stance from the Annex 1 countries, the richer countries, that they didn't want to be paying the major costs for any particular development. Rather, they would pay additional costs, what they call additionality. So, you know, maybe you'd get a few percentage points on the profitability of your project with carbon credits by design. So it was marginal. Moreover, because of the way Europeans and some other persons in particular set their markets, carbon credit prices really dropped for a very long time, to the point where a lot of developers in this region say, boy, you have to go through all the fuss to get carbon credits, to you know, get the registration and the verification and marketing and blah, blah, blah. And you only get a teeny bit of benefit from it. So a lot of people didn't bother. There have been some moves though. In some markets, you see the prices of certified emission reductions or whatever the particular market term might be coming up. There's a recognition, I think, in the UNFCCC processes that trading of emissions outcomes is going to be important. And so one does hope that carbon prices will rise and that people in the region will have the ability to sell into some of those markets to fill the demand for these certified emissions reductions. But like I said, for now, I think it's not the main thing. I think you have plenty of other reasons to drive this transition, right? There are plenty of economic reasons, plenty of energy security reasons, and I think those will continue to be the main drivers for a while now.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'm not sure if Dr. Kane wants to add anything to that discussion.
No, I think Gerard covered it very, very well. That last point that Gerald made is very important. There are lots of energy security and economics around that really is going to drive this process and has been driving the transition at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that addition. There's one question here. In addition to improving partnerships between CARICOM countries, should governments not also be trying to develop partnerships with the private sector within their countries to spread out the effort in achieving RE goals? Gerald, I'm going to throw that one to you again.
Sure. I think the short answer is yes. The question is always what that partnership looks like. I think the fact is that you're never going to have enough public sector money to cover the entire set of investments that you're going to need if we're going to get to a completely renewable energy future. So private sector participation and partnership is inevitable. How you shape that is a question that is harder for me to answer. You know, different policy environments, different countries have different imperatives. I don't know what final form it takes, but I do know that the private sector has the money.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. I'm going to throw our final question to Mr. Trejo. We've heard a lot about what the regional quality infrastructure has been doing in relation to projects in the area of energy. I'm wondering if you can perhaps expand a bit on what has been happening with the projects and what kind of projects we've been seeing in terms of developing quality infrastructure in energy.
Well, thank you for a question, Latoya. I think it's important maybe to understand the level of investment that has gone in with the partnerships and the donor funding that we've seen over the last couple of years. So, I mean, we've seen an investment of to the tune of almost approximately 2.5 million US dollars go into projects in the region. We have our quality for sustainable energy consumption project, the QSEC project, which is um, roughly about 1.1 million US dollars that we're getting funds for. We have seen, as I mentioned to you, we've had um, we have the TAPSEC project, which supports the CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code and the labeling scheme. So those projects run to the tune of 195,000, almost 200,000 US dollars. So um, then there is a TAPSEC project, which is really the technical assistance program for sustainable energy in the Caribbean. And again, that helped to also support both the regional energy efficiency building code and the labeling scheme. So complementary to two projects complementing each other to achieve the same goal. Um, and that's roughly about half a million, little over half a million US dollars. So uh, again, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's a lot of momentum for quality infrastructure to support the energy sector. I think that some things are exploratory, and I think that there is a lot more that we can do in terms of supporting the sector again at the national and regional level, and of course establishing those partnerships. So I think uh, the more we again promote quality infrastructure and its role in supporting key sectors of our national and regional economies, it opens the door for additional funding and to make sure that the funding supports those immediate, medium to long term goals and objectives.
Thank you very much. And that is a pretty good point on which to close us. I think one of the critical things we've heard repeated by all three of our presenters today is the importance of these partnerships, and not just partnerships among the government agencies and the regional agencies, but partnerships as well with the private sector and what those partnerships will look like if we are really to make the kind of moves that we need to make to make sure that our energy sector is supported by the quality infrastructure, the standards, the measurement systems, the conformity assessment systems, and then that there's the overall awareness so that you, the public, know what's happening. I want to thank first our CEO for bringing the opening remarks for this 8th webinar. I want to thank our presenters, Mr. Gerald Lindo, Mr. Jose Trejo, and Dr. Daniel Kane for agreeing to sit with us today during this discussion. As usual, we'd love if we had more time for discussions and the Q&A. But I thank you, presenters, for your time and for the information that you have shared with the public today. I want to make an announcement that our next webinar is actually going to be on the 27th of this month. And that webinar, we'll be looking at our CARICOM Regional Energy Efficiency Building Code and the lessons for implementation. So we're actually going to look at what needs to be done in our region if we really want to implement the building code. And we'll be looking at some case studies from other countries in terms of what they have done and what can we learn from that process. So if you're interested in that, you'll see on your screen the poster and you can join us. You can look out for our social media in relation to the links for the registration for those sessions. I thank you all for staying with us. I know it's about 10 minutes to midday and we would have gone over by just about 20 minutes, but thank you very much. It shows your interest and we thank you for that interest. You can look to our social media as well for the responses to the questions that would have been posed and answered in the Q&A, just so that you have them at your fingertips in the YouTube chat function. You'll find the responses there from today. But I thank you all. I also want to say another thank you to the TAPSEC project for allowing us to have these kinds of engagements with you, the public. And we look forward as well to further engagements and further discussions and further partnerships of these natures so that we can, keep you guys informed and also hear what you are thinking in relation to where we need to go as a region. So please have a wonderful day. I want to say thank you as well to the team in the background. Project Coordinator Janice Hilaire, our Technical Officer for Accreditation and Conformity Assessment, Stephen Farquharson in the background, and of course the technical hands-on team of JL Brown and Dika Straker, who are always on point at these webinars. So thank you guys very much for the support. Thank you for the information. Thank you for the discussion. And thank you, the public as well, our attendees, for being with us. And please have a great day.